Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and glad to have you with us. Obviously, appreciate your patience as we were not here yesterday. We're going to talk more about that here in a moment, just briefly about kind of some schedule stuff here. I want to make sure you're aware of kind of everything we have going on with that, but we also want to deliver a really good show for you, especially since we didn't have one yesterday. So it's Jake Fromm stopping by today. It's Connor Riley stopping by today. A little bit of interesting news around the rest of the SEC that kind of maybe helps give shape to what some of the schedule stuff may look like in the future. We're going to talk about that. We're going to make fun of the lousy, stinking Gators. Always a great thing to do. We'll do some of that off the top here in a moment. We're going to try to settle in, have a good show, try to give you a lot of interesting information here, and hopefully entertain you a little bit there as well on this Valentine's edition of our program. So what do you say we go ahead and get it all started? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I want to start today by saying thank you to all of you for a couple of things. You know, we didn't have a show yesterday, and I'm always afraid that when something like that happens, we try not to be away very much, but I'm always afraid that if we are, people don't really quite get the message of what's going on, why there's no show. We try to be as consistent as we possibly can. A lot of you are aware my grandmother passed away, and I put that out on Twitter yesterday, and so many of you sent really nice condolences and nice messages to me. I really, really appreciate that. It really means a lot to me. I haven't had a chance to respond back too much yet, but I certainly want to, and certainly want to just take this time to say thank you to everybody who has reached out. I just appreciate that so much, and I also appreciate your patience with me while I was not here yesterday. Let me just say a couple of quick things on this too, and we'll kind of move on and get the show started. You know, my grandmother, 88 years old, so this is one of those things where for most of her 80-plus years on life, you know, she's really very healthy and very really inspiring. Just how healthy and strong she was. Lived a big, full life. I mean, for a long time. That's 88 years, obviously a long time. Last year or so, been kind of a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort, and this is one of those things where many of you probably experienced this in your own life, where it's a situation where now, it's probably an answered prayer in some ways that she's not dealing with some of the pain and suffering that she'd kind of been dealing with lately. She's just really kind of gotten fatigued and gotten tired. I think she was just sort of ready to go. And so obviously in a lot of ways, that's one of those sort of answers to prayers here is that she's not kind of dealing with some of the pain and some of the just sort of general discomfort that she'd grown to deal with over the course of the last few months, last year or so. I'll also say this too. You always hear these like songs about, man, wish you could go back in time the way things used to be, back in the day, whatever else. Well, my version of that was at her house. My grandfather and my grandmother, I call them Pop and Nanny. That was my version of, oh man, that great summer when you didn't have a care in the world, or those great times when you were growing up when everything was just sort of seemingly perfect in the world because you were so young, you were so innocent, you didn't know anything else that was going on there. Like my version of that was at their house. So they were very, very close to me. She was very close to me. And so, I hope you obviously had a great experience of that in your own life. I certainly did when it comes to them. And so, truly, sincerely, I mean, my gosh, I'm just going to miss her. And my grandfather's been now gone for a good while, but I'm just going to miss them there so much. And I'll also say this here really quickly too, which is that I'm back at work today, but the funeral is tomorrow. So we are not going to have a show tomorrow. Normally in a situation like this, we kind of pre-record, but we're already pre-recording some shows because I'm going to be on vacation next week. And oh gosh, I'm ready for vacation. But I'm going to be on vacation next week. So we're already pre-recording some shows for that. We just don't quite have the bandwidth to do another pre-record. So tomorrow, because of the funeral, I am not going to be here. So y'all do me one quick favor if you don't mind. Let folks know about this because not everybody, watches the show or listens to the show on the same day that it airs, and not everybody maybe hears, every single thing that I say. So I hate the idea of people kind of wondering what's going on and not have a show on Monday, then not have a show on Wednesday. If you know people that like the show, if you know people that you've connected with that are kind of a part of our audience here, let them know what I've got going on. We'll be back on normal on Thursday. But tomorrow, because of my grandmother's funeral, I will not be here. So y'all try to help me get the word out on that, and then I'll do my part to do that there as well. So with all of that said, thank you once again for your patience with us being a little bit different, and thank you so much for all of your kind words, your messages. I just really, really appreciate that. That means truly a lot to me. Now, with that said, we'll shift gears here. We'll try to do our normal stuff here, and we're going to have some fun. There is something going on at Florida that I think you ought to be aware of, or at least the rumblings and grumblings of this going on that I think you ought to be aware of. And it's kind of amazing to think that we are here again. I was actually going back in time here today. We used to make fun of Dan Mullen on this show when he was Florida coach so much. And I was going back and listening to some of the stuff we had done on him in the past and just mocking him and laughing at him and whatever else. And I wanted to play some of it for you here today, but frankly, it's just some of it's so long that we wouldn't have time to do anything else if we did all of that. But you remember, certainly Florida fans remember, because they still kind of give me a lot of grief for that, how much we used to mock Dan Mullen on the show. And when Mullen got fired, the one thing that you definitely knew about Florida fans is this was one of a series of sort of failed head coaches for them. And the one thing you knew for a fact was they really believed we don't want to be here again anytime soon. That the Mullen era that once looked so promising because they won the Pandemic East in 2020 and had a couple of top 10 performances on the field and seemed to be this offensive genius. So many people seem to like so much about Dan Mullen that Mullen in a lot of ways was going to be the anti-Kirby Smart. He's going to be the counterbalance to Kirby Smart and try to find a way to do things a little bit different and be this thorn in Smart's side. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that this was really the narrative being pushed. It seems so foreign now because of how untrue that turned out to be, but it was not that long ago that people were just sort of saying that all the time, and it ended up fizzling and ended up failing. Mullen's, now, I don't even know what he's doing, but he's working on TV or whatever. He's certainly not coaching football anymore because he crashed up against the side of the Georgia program, and was the Florida program. Mullen himself as a coach was sort of never the same again. And Gators fans, in response to all that, said, we definitely don't want to be here again. We need to make sure we get our next coach right. And after 1 year on the job, there is some suspicion that Florida, at least possibly, may have gotten it wrong again. This is very interesting. There was a story up at ESPN.com kind of looking at, various potential coaches in the hot seat and all the potential kind of, change that could be afoot in the very near future when it comes to some of the coaches around college football. And one of the names that got discussed here was Florida coach Billy Napier now, based on some of the opinions of a guy like, say, Adam Rittenburg, who's a writer there at ESPN.com. Rittenburg looking at Napier's future, and Rittenburg saying that, hey, it could be sooner rather than later that Florida could have another coach on the hot seat again, and the competition with Georgia potentially being one of the reasons why. Let me show you a few sentences here from Rittenburg at ESPN.com talking about Billy Napier. You find this to be interesting. Rittenburg says, now Napier would have to really need things to go wrong not to reach year 3 in games. In other words, he was a first-year coach in 2022. This will be his second year coming up. And Rittenburg says, he's probably going to get that third year. He did, after all, inherit a messy situation. But Rittenburg says Florida continues to fall behind Georgia. The Gators' other main rival, Tennessee, is finally winning big again behind a high-flying offense that Florida fans would love. Napier is signed through 2027, and his success is tied to athletic director Scott Strickland, who likely won't be able to hire a third football coach at Florida. But if the Gators struggle to reach bowl eligibility and can't find a good path forward on offense, Rittenburg goes on to say, there will be some desire for a complete reset. Napier asked for a lot when he arrived, and Florida came through for him. Soon, he must do the same. That is Adam Rittenburg there, ESPN.com, saying if Florida doesn't start winning more, Billy Napier's job is going to be in trouble, Florida Athletic Director Scott Strickland's job is going to be in trouble, and once again, the Gators might find themselves on the doorstep of having to have another complete reset. After that's what Jim McElwain was supposed to be, that's what Dan Mullen was supposed to be, that's what Billy Napier was supposed to be, and Rittenburg says it's not beyond the realm of possibility that Florida may need a big reset all over again. I don't have to tell you this. If you were a Georgia fan, you love the thought of that, because for a long time, and really we started Gatorator Countdown when we introduced Eddie the Blind Squirrel, the official DawgNation Daily mascot. So much of this was about Florida as a measuring stick. Well, now it's almost hard to even remember a time in which Georgia measured itself by Florida because, as Adam Rittenburg points out, Georgia's level of performance has so far exceeded what Florida brings to the table that the idea that Georgia once measured itself based on how it was doing in the Georgia-Florida rivalry, that seems crazy because Georgia has won the last 2 national championships. But just because the Gators are less relevant than they used to be, and just because Florida is so much worse than it used to be because of how good Georgia has gotten and sort of sucked the life out of the Florida program, that doesn't mean that in college football, a sport that loves its rivalries, a sport that enjoys kicking your hated foe when they're down, that doesn't mean that Georgia fans, don't like the thought of all of this. And if you want to go back to when Mullen actually was fired by Florida, Kirby Smart was asked about it, and it was so funny. The answer that Kirby Smart gave to this at the time, I think, was such a contrast to what Smart kind of actually felt, that I think Smart did revel in that competition against Dan Mullen. I do think that Smart looked for the opportunity to vanquish Mullen at every turn, and I think that Smart loved twisting the knife on some of the recruiting issues that Mullen was having, and Smart just really seemed to enjoy all of that. But when he was asked right after Dan Mullen got fired about what you think about a coach in the SEC that you've done battle with losing his job, Smart gave a much more measured, much calmer, much more, sort of buttoned up answer. And it's one of those things that Smart may be facing this question again sooner rather than later of getting another Florida coach fired. But this is what he said, going back a year or so ago when Mullen got the axe. Here's Kirby Smart.
I think the landscape across college football is what it is. The stakes have gotten higher. The pay has gotten higher, and with that comes expectations. It's a different landscape now than it was even 4 or 5 years ago in terms of portal, recruiting, number of initials. Everything changes so fast, and so it makes it tougher, and it's a much tougher job. And I think you've seen a lot of people in our level go to the next level because it has a little less strain on your family and things. So I know it's a tough atmosphere, but most people would say they pay you so much it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, I hate it for Dan because I think Dan's a good person, and it's a tough situation. But it's a profession we chose to be in, and I know Dan will be fine. He'll be perfectly fine.
So take that same quote, pull out Dan, put in Billy Napier. You may be able to re-rack that here coming up in a year at least a year or two based on what Adam Rittenburg's saying there at ESPN.com. But here's the point in all of this. Smart talks about the fact that, so much of what makes it an issue on coaches right now is how fast things can change. And here's what I'm here to tell you, is that when it comes to the situation in the SEC, with Florida in particular, things are also about to change even faster than they ever have before. And this is why, if you're a Georgia fan, I think you love the idea of this so much, because this is not just reveling the fact that Florida is bad right now, worse than they could have ever imagined, at least certainly in comparison to Georgia. This is not just about that sort of short-term deal. This is about inflicting some long-term damage on Florida that could potentially redefine the way the program is thought of. Because think about this here for a moment. You're talking about now a series of several failed Florida coaches year after year after year. The last Florida national championship came in 2008. I mean, the current recruits have no living memory of Florida being a good football team at all. And if Georgia could go out and beat up on Billy Napier in Florida again this year, if Florida, as Rittenburg pointed out, could struggle to even have a winning season, which I think right now sort of stands to reason they probably will, if all those things happen, then all of a sudden now you're talking about adding Billy Napier to the list of Florida coaches like Dan Mullen and like, Jim McElwain, who have been incredibly disappointing. And the future doesn't get any better because look what's about to happen. We're about to leave the day of divisions in the SEC. And for a long time, a school like Florida has been able to say, well, you got a game coming against Vanderbilt, although this past year Vanderbilt beat Florida. You got a game coming against Kentucky, and at one point in time, Florida had like a 30-plus year winning streak against the Wildcats. You've got these games coming against teams that more often than not have sort of felt like automatic wins for you. But in the future, That's not going to be the case anymore. You'll still, every other year or so, get to play the Kentuckys and the Floridas and the teams like that, I should say the Vanderbilts, the teams that have been, easier than not, more years than not. You'll get a chance to play them, still obviously on kind of a rotational basis. But in most instances, you won't have those kind of easy, free wins baked into your schedule year after year after year. The SEC schedule, by adding Texas and Oklahoma, is about to get tougher. Not just because Texas and Oklahoma are a part of it, because they're going to rearrange the entire SEC schedule to make it more balanced, and a team like Florida is going to be playing a lot more teams out of the SEC West they've been playing here in the past. And so if you're a Florida fan here, and there's Gator fans that listen from time to time, then you have to be very much aware of the very real possibility that as your program is eroding in terms of what it once was thought of, what it once was capable to do, you're now entering into an SEC that's going to be even tougher than it was before, which maybe accelerates the rate at which, Florida is just no longer a national program. So, listen, there's a degree to which this topic's probably a little bit spiteful. There's a degree to which this, is probably a little bit of reveling in somebody else's misery. But that's what college football is about. It's about these rivalries. It's about things like that. And if you're a Georgia fan, there has never been a better time to be a fan. Not just because of how good you are, but how bad a lot of your hated rivals have been, including, as we say around here, those lousy, stinking Gators. It has been bad for Florida. Georgia this season has a chance to make it worse. And eventually, Billy Napier could be added to the list of other failed Florida coaches like Jim McElwain and Dan Mullen, who did their best to go head-to-head with Kirby Smart and ended up on the unemployment line for their efforts. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. After that, on video across all the platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, of course, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 96 The Ref, as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are happy to have you tuning in on our program here today. Big thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it all possible. Longtime friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily. I love recommending them because I know the kind of work they do for a lot of folks in our audience, homeowners. You love your home. It's the place you have your deepest emotional connection, but a lot of situations it also represents your most significant financial investment there as well. You want to protect it. And one of the greatest threats to the structural integrity of that home that you live in, water creeping in where it's not supposed to be, foundation settling to create those cracks that obviously kind of throw the whole thing into potential chaos there. That is what Engineered Solutions of Georgia wants to be known for you. They want to deal with your foundation issues. They want to deal with your waterproofing issues. They have got an entire team of engineers on staff, and there is nobody else in our market that can say they have that level of resource dedicated to solving your foundation, your waterproofing issues than our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. That is what they are all about. They're also proud partners of UGA, which makes it really fun to do business with them. Great to do business with someone who just, supports UGA and does all that. That's what Engineered Solutions of Georgia is all about. Great friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily there as well. If it's a simple fix, they want to just give you that simple solution to your problem. But as a bigger problem, and sometimes when it comes to foundation stuff, the waterproofing stuff, it can be. If it's a bigger problem, they want to do that for you too. So give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That is 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. If you've got a waterproofing issue, if you see water where it's not supposed to be, we've had a lot of rain this winter, so you've had plenty of chance to notice that. If you see water where it's not supposed to be, or you see those cracks in the wall, or maybe down there in the concrete floor in the basement, whatever else, if you're noticing that kind of stuff, it is time to get that seen about. Our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia can help you on that. 678-ESOG now. That's the phone number to dial. 678-ESOG now. All right, quick reminder, as we said before, no show tomorrow. I have to step away from work, and I apologize for that. But we're going to work really hard to give you a great series of shows coming up after that, including live on Thursday, then some pre-recorded stuff as I'm on vacation, and then, of course, all throughout the spring here, leading up to the start of spring practice. So we're looking forward to all of that. Also, speaking of cruise vacations and fun stuff like that, coming up here in a couple of minutes' time, we're also going to give the winner, we're announced that, of our cruise vacation giveaway courtesy of Kroger. We'll do that here coming up in a couple of minutes. It's Jake Fromm on today's show. We're excited about that. It's Connor Riley coming up here in a minute there as well. Prior to that, though, let me go around the DawgHouse. And, I was watching the Super Bowl on Sunday, and many of you are aware, I don't make any bones about this, I am nowhere near as big an NFL fan as I am a college fan. I like to watch the pro game. I try to, on the Red Zone channel, they always call it the witching hour, around 3 p.m. or so, when a lot of those games come to a close. You have these exciting finishes. I try to be settled in on a Sunday, kind of in time for that witching hour, to see a lot of these, good conclusions to the series of games. Obviously follow the playoffs, clearly watch the Super Bowl, but I don't have nearly the emotional investment in the NFL that I do in college football, but I do try to follow the league. And watching the build-up to the Super Bowl than the game itself, the one conclusion I sort of drew from this, and those of you who truly follow the NFL very closely, you may feel a little bit different about this than I do, but the one conclusion I sort of drew from this is that, to me, Kansas City, the team that won, Philadelphia, the team that fell just short, in a lot of ways, to me, they sort of represent what I sort of think of as the two archetypes for how you can be successful in the NFL right now. That you can be like Kansas City or you can be like Philadelphia. What I mean by that is if you're the Chiefs, you've got your franchise quarterback, in the case of Patrick Mahomes, one of the, I would say, greats of all time. You pay him huge dollars, and you kind of build your entire organization around Patrick Mahomes. If you had Mahomes, of course, you'd want to do that. That's kind of one way in which you can be a very good NFL team. You should have the great quarterback, spend big on him, build your entire team around him. The drawback to that is if you've got more at quarterback, you are going to have less resources to devote to other spots in the field, especially in a salary cap league, which sort of opens the door for a team like Philadelphia. Jalen Hurts is a good quarterback. He's had a very good season, but Hurts is also one of these non-first-round picks who's kind of still in a rookie deal, does not cost the Eagles a ton of money. And when you're cheaper at quarterback, still effective at quarterback, but when you're cheaper at quarterback, that gives you more resources to put in other places. You can put some on defense. You can put some along your offensive line. You can run the football a little bit better. You can kind of create that balance and the depth with roster because you're not paying nearly as much for your quarterback as a team like Kansas City is for his. Now, I'd say Jalen Hurts is nowhere near the quarterback that Patrick Mahomes is, but in a salary cap league, getting effective play at quarterback at a discount on a bargain creates opportunities for players at other positions. Now, what I find to be interesting about this is that up until now, college football has not really kind of had the same sort of salary structure or the idea of a salary cap necessarily, but it sort of seems like football has worked the same way. And this is not new ground for us. We've talked about this plenty. Is that there are teams in college football that are seemingly built like the Kansas City Chiefs. Alabama has been that with Bryce Young. Ohio State, I would say, has sort of felt like that with C.J. Stroud and a lot of quarterbacks prior to that, where you've got the college version of the franchise quarterback, but for some reason having more at quarterback, even without the appearance of a salary cap necessarily, has sort of created less at other places. Alabama's become, I would say, less effective as a defensive program with the rise of its quarterback play and the rise of its wide receiver play. I think Ohio State was pretty good and certainly pretty balanced in most spots, but over the course of the last few years, the embrace of Ryan Day style and the quarterbacks that help run that, the wide receivers that help power all of that, has seemingly led to less success running the football, less dominance along the offensive line, less of a defensive presence than maybe what the best Ohio State teams of the past would have been. And it's sometimes sort of hard to describe exactly why that is true, but to our own eyes, we sort of see that be true. Whereas Georgia, to me, has sort of felt like a little bit more like the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, in the case of Georgia, they've won the last two championships, and Philadelphia sort of fell a little bit short of that. But nonetheless, there's this sort of feeling here that, hey, Georgia as a quarterback, it's been Stetson in the last couple of years. Who knows who it's going to be in the future? Not necessarily the forefront, not necessarily the face of the organization. Good quarterback play. You have to have effective quarterback play to be successful. But ultimately, for a team like Georgia, quarterback is just one of the positions on the field, and Georgia's kind of created a level of balance across both sides of the ball, all 11 guys in the field, that to me kind of resembles a little bit more about what the Philadelphia Eagles have kind of looked like. Now, my point in saying all of this is to simply say this. If that has seemed true in college football for teams like Georgia, or maybe the opposite, teams like Alabama and Ohio State, if that has seemed true in the past, there may be a tangible reality where that gets even more actually true in the future. Because, as we've said, historically, college football has not really been a league where you kind of think of the players being paid, whether they were or they weren't. It has not really been a league where you have thought of that necessarily being a thing. But obviously in the NIL age in which we live in now and the way in which NIL is likely to evolve in the future, this is going to be more of a thing. And I would say that for college programs, they may themselves have to make their choice. Do you want to be like Kansas City and put a lot of your NIL dollars towards one really good player? Or do you want to be a little bit more like Philadelphia and kind of spread your wealth around a little bit and create a little more roster balance? This, I believe, is going to have to be a choice that more teams make in the future. And I want to show you some interesting words here. There's a guy named Shannon Terry. Shannon is a guy who's famous for starting a lot of the national recruiting websites that you may have read over the course of years. He's kind of, started Rivals, and he started 24/7. Now he's working to build a website called On3. He's an executive that kind of exists in the college football media space. Kind of an interesting voice, I would say. And he's one of the guys over the course of the last couple of years, I would also say, that has been the most bullish or among the most bullish voices out there about the future of NIL and how important this is going to be for college sports and how good this is going to be for college sports. So Shannon has been a very pro-NIL figure. But over the course of the last couple of days, he had a thread on Twitter that got my attention where he spoke in a little bit more realistic terms about what the near future for NIL looks like. And I think this is kind of interesting as a lot of college programs now kind of recalibrate their expectations for how much NIL money they're going to be able to spend and how they're going to use some of that money. Let me read this to you on the screen here. Media executive Shannon Terry says, he says, our team at On3, which is a website, spent the last few weeks traveling and speaking with coaches, administrators, and NIL collectives. Across the board, now listen to this, across the board, collectives and schools are becoming more efficient and staunch in value and boundaries when it comes to NIL. Shannon says that funding is going to be lower than the collectives' previously communicated goals. In other words, the collectives thought they're going to be able to raise X amount of dollars, but the truth is they're going to raise far less than that. So therefore, they're going to have to be efficient about how they use this NIL money. He goes on to say, there is no such thing as the term being floated of the infinite salary cap. In other words, Shannon says there is nobody out there that's got an unlimited amount of money to spend, which is interesting to hear. He says every collective in school has a pain threshold. He says we see the majority of the elite programs somewhere in the $4 to $6 million deployed range over the course of the next 12 months. Those elites originally targeted $8 to $10 million. So in other words, what Shannon's saying is a lot of programs thought they were going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 to $10 million to spend each year on NIL, but the truth is it may be more like $4 or $6 million. This from a guy who's a very pro-NIL figure, and as he says, from talking to coaches and the collectives themselves, everybody seems to be downgrading the level of expectation they have for how much money they're going to be able to spend. Now, what does this mean? To me, it means that once again, you go back to exactly the same kind of comparison we were making a moment ago. You can be the Kansas City Chiefs. You can have your Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, and you can spend big on him. But in an NIL world where you've only got $6 million to go around, that gives you less money to pay other players. Or you can be like a Philadelphia, where you may not spend quite as much on a franchise, face-of-the-program type quarterback, but you might have a little more resources to devote to other places. I think both can be successful, as you've seen with Kansas City and Philadelphia, but it is a choice that every college program is going to have to make in the very near future. All right, before we bring on Connor Riley, we're running a little bit late here. I do want to announce the winner of our DawgNation cruise, courtesy of Kroger. We've been announcing that, had been pumping that. We had a lot of folks who made their they registered for their chance to win, and now, courtesy of Kroger, we are happy to announce our Kroger Cruise giveaway winner. And what a great thrill this is. I know he's already been notified, so sounds like he's thrilled. His name is Robert Rozier, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, of Thompson, Georgia. Robert Rozier. It could be Rozier. Maybe it's Rozier. Maybe it's kind of like Mike Rozier, the former running back. Robert Rozier of Thompson, Georgia, the winner of our DawgNation Cruise, courtesy of Kroger. I know last night a lot of the folks that are going to be on the DawgNation Cruise had a little bit of a get-together on Zoom to kind of talk about some of that. I hated I couldn't be a part of that, obviously because of what I've been dealing with. But I know the excitement is building for our DawgNation Cruise. And now Robert, who I believe is going to be bringing his son along with him, and boy, what a great thrill that is for that young man. But they're going to be a part of our DawgNation Cruise. So, Robert, congratulations to you. Big thanks to our friends at Kroger for making all this possible. Great giveaway. Ton of fun right there. You love to see that. Really good stuff here, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. By the way, speaking of Kroger, we're going to talk to Jake Fromm today. Before the show is done, we'll do a Kroger Fresh Take with him. But for now, on everything going on around UGA, including how the future of NIL kind of impacts what Georgia and every other program is going to be doing, let's have that conversation right now with Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Great to have Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG here today. Connor, let me bring in what I was just talking about, and you know so much more about the NFL than I do, but when I look at the Eagles, when I look at Kansas City, I see a couple of different archetypes. I see franchise quarterback, very expensive, and obviously if you got a guy like Mahomes, you want to build your organization around him. I see Jalen Hurts, effective but much less expensive, a little bit more cost efficient, which allows you to spend money other places. Given the fact that college football is very much an NIL thing now, and you got guys like Shannon Terry saying, hey, the actual money here is a little bit less than some of these collectives thought it was going to be, how you choose to use the NIL money in the future seems to be a pretty important decision. And if you want to have a big-time five-star type quarterback, that just gives you less to spend other places. But if you want to be a program like Georgia's been the last couple of years where you get good quarterback play, that's not necessarily the center of your universe because you want to be good everywhere else, that these are the kinds of choices that college programs are about to have to make, much the same way in a salary cap league NFL teams have for quite some time?
Yeah, just think if every team could have Patrick Mahomes, they'd pay whatever the price tag is to pay him. The Eagles would certainly do that, and Jalen Hurts is going to get a lot more expensive. He signs a very pricey deal this offseason, and so the Eagles are going to have to, I think, try and rework the way they go about team building. Yes, there are certain teams out there that want to, try and hit it big with cheap quarterbacks, but the point being, especially in the NFL, with so few capable quarterbacks, if you find a really good one like a Joe Burrow, like a Jalen Hurts that you're able to have for cheap for a few years, that's sort of your window to win a title. And then you have to just hope that when you do come time to pay the quarterback that he's able to elevate the rest of your team like Patrick Mahomes is right now. College football, I just don't think it's that way. College football is always going to be a sum of the parts more so than an individual quarterback. Caleb Williams, I think, was probably the best quarterback in college football this past season. And USC lost 3 times, and there was not much he could do to sort of elevate that team beyond where he got them this season. C.J. Stroud was great, but there was nothing he could really do to slow down that Georgia offense. And so I think, while NIL, I understand the point you're trying to make and the point being out there. At the end of the day, it's not so much about can you get 1 or 2 super-duper stars. It's can you amass the most raw amount of talent. That's why Georgia, I believe, has won the last 2 national titles. They've done a better job than anyone of obviously landing big-time recruitments, but also identifying guys who fly under the radar a little bit and are able to turn them into productive players like a Javon Bullard. Brock Bowers, I think, falls into that category there as well. So I see the metaphor there, but I just think at the end of the day, college and NFL are so different that it's hard to even imagine NIL playing a fraction of what the salary cap does in team building at this level.
Well, I guess what the point that I'm building to here is that when I look at the future of Georgia, the quarterback spot, I think a lot of folks are wondering, okay, what's it going to be like here moving forward, whether it be because of guys like Carson Beck and Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton currently on the roster, or the potential that you bring in a guy like Dylan Raiola in the future. I think some Georgia fans wonder, is this program going to evolve and eventually have the college version of Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, whether Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud kind of have been? And I sort of get the impression that's not what Georgia's heading towards, that whoever the starting quarterback is for Georgia in 2023, whoever the starting quarterback for Georgia is in 2026, that it's probably, to me, likely to feel like what Georgia's felt like the last couple of years, where you get good, effective quarterback play, but the quarterback is not necessarily the face of this program. It's not necessarily the one guy that stands far out ahead of everybody else. It is a player that's in keeping with the other 10 guys in the field and the other, players in the program, that this is not going to be a Kansas City Chiefs style program where the quarterback is necessarily the face of the program, even in kind of the post Stetson Bennett world.
Right. Well, even let's go back over the past decade. None of Alabama's teams were led by the quarterback. Even that 2017 team that won thanks to the second half from Tua, Jalen Hurts was the quarterback that got them to that point. And so, I think with what we've seen from college football over the last 15 years, yes, there are Kyler Murray's, Baker Mayfield's out there. You can win a lot of games that way, but to win it all, to win a national championship, which Georgia is now very squarely in the business of doing, you need a balanced 1 through 85 roster, and that's what Georgia goes about doing. That's how they go about doing things. Now, obviously, they'll take a Dylan Raiola if he wants to come here, but Dylan Raiola coming to Georgia would require in my opinion, some sacrifices from him, and I just don't think we've seen a top-level quarterback willing to do that yet from a recruit standpoint to come to Georgia. And that's not to knock those guys. They, have their own goals and careers to look forward to. But, even Brock Vandagriff came to Georgia because he wanted to be closer to home. That's the biggest quarterback recruit Georgia's landed since Justin Fields, and we know how the Justin Fields era worked out at Georgia. Now, it went out working really well for Justin Fields. But again, if you're coming to Georgia, you understand that you're making a little bit of a sacrifice. You're not walking on a paved road here. You're going to have to make some choices, and it's going to be tough, and there's no guarantee that you're going to end up being a starting quarterback. Even look at a guy like Carson Beck. Most guys wouldn't wait 4 years for an opportunity to start. That Carson could have potentially gone elsewhere, at other points in his career, and the fact that he's willing to wait, I think, speaks a little bit of Carson, and also the fact that he knows he's going to have to go out there and beat out two really talented quarterbacks in Gunnar Stockton and Brock Vandagriff. A lot of guys at this day and age, they're not even waiting 2 years, especially those elite-level quarterback prospects. So I think when it comes to Georgia, again, they know better than anyone who sort of fits what they want to do. And they understand, again, you're going to play with incredible talent around here, and you're going to have a chance to really impress NFL-level evaluators. But what we've seen from top-level quarterback prospects doesn't necessarily jive with what Georgia wants to do as a team and as a system.
Speaking of the Chiefs here for a moment, I thought you had an interesting piece at DawgNation.com kind of comparing a vibe around Kansas City to the vibe around Georgia, where, Georgia clearly tried to play the disrespect card on the heels of winning the national championship. Kansas City's tried to do some of that there as well. And, Connor, in both cases, I think it's totally fair and I think it's totally warranted. Now, some of the stuff that Georgia players were saying in the immediate aftermath of the national championship game, the idea they were picked to be 6-6, 7-5, that's clearly exaggerated. I don't know of anybody who truly thought that. But prior to the start of the season, when they were not picked to be preseason number one, prior to the Tennessee game in November, where seemingly the entire world lined up against the Vols, there was this thought that somehow Georgia was, inferior compared to what, a reigning national champion should maybe even perceived to be. And I think that Kansas City dealt with a lot of the same kind of stuff. The entire world thought that Cincinnati was going to win the AFC title game. The best that I could tell, for the most part, the entire world was sort of lined up around the Eagles for the Super Bowl. That in watching the way that Kansas City responded to winning the Super Bowl, it did kind of remind me of Georgia. And, it is one of these things where I think after the fact, there's this kind of attempt to sort of redefine the narrative to make us all seem more certain of the outcome than we actually were. I think both the Chiefs and Georgia are well within their rights to say we were disrespected, because I think that in a lot of ways both kind of were.
I wouldn't say disrespected. I would say they were both doubted. Again, like the Chiefs are in the Super Bowl, and someone has to be an underdog. And the Eagles, I thought over the course of the season, were the more complete football team. And, Georgia over the course of the entire season was the best team in college football. But there are moments throughout the year that both can point to being doubted. A lot of people at the beginning of the year picked the Buffalo Bills. Georgia, obviously, the Tennessee game, you bring up the fact that, look, I mean, we were there in the preseason. A lot of people were picking either Alabama or Ohio State to win the national championship, and not many were doing so for Georgia. Disrespect, again, that's an athlete thing where you have to take whatever fuel is given to you, and because it is so difficult to get to the top of your proverbial mountain, however corny it might seem or come across, you have to use it to get there, and that's sort of the difference between them and us. And I do think that both these teams can point to the fact that they were doubted, but Travis Kelce, you had Patrick Mahomes on your team the entire year. You had the best quarterback and the best player every time you step on the field. Travis Kelce, allegedly, trying to tell people he's the greatest tight end of all time. People are saying that. I don't really see how that's disrespecting his angle. And again, Georgia, look, we've all pointed out and laughed how ridiculous it is the idea that they were going to go 7-5 this year. But for the guys in those locker rooms, it matters to hear that kind of stuff. And the coaches, no doubt, did their job and fueling that and using that motivation as fuel. And it's telling that moments after winning and having a chance to celebrate, they chose to sort of call that out and point to it and note that, hey, that's a reason that we got here, the public doubt that we had faced by people either picking other teams, saying this team wasn't ready to repeat or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the case of the Georgia situation, which obviously matters to me far more than the Kansas City situation does, I mean, I think the narrative through line for the season was the idea that Georgia was playing to prove something. I think it felt that way itself, and no matter how exaggerated the claims may have seemed, on the field in L.A. against TCU, I think there was an edge this 2022 team had about the way it went about its business that made the feeling around this season far different than it was in 2021, where that obviously just wasn't there because Georgia was trying to prove something. Well, in 2022, I think they were trying to prove something to somebody else, and there was definitely a little bit of a nasty edge this 2022 team had that I don't think the 2021 team had. I don't think it necessarily needed, but this 2022 team, from a feeling standpoint, was totally different for me because of that.
Right. Well, even consider going through the end of the season, yes, Georgia went 15-0, something last year's team didn't accomplish. They won the SEC, something last year's team didn't accomplish. They won the national title game 65-7, something last year's team didn't accomplish. They won a shootout against a similarly elite team in Ohio State, something last year's team did not accomplish. We still hear, if Georgia played the 2022 team, if you put the 2022 team up against the 2021 team, I think the 21 team is a touchdown favorite. They're still hearing that. They're always going to hear that. And the reality is, look, that matters. And I thought Stetson Bennett had some really strong quotes on this prior to the national championship game, talking about the fact that they were doubted. And Stetson always has a good understanding of the perception out there, and he understands that, yes, on a certain level, Georgia operates at a level far higher than the average college football program. But among those elite programs, there was a level of doubt with Georgia that did not exist at Alabama last year, that did not exist at Ohio State last year. And I think because of all that, you saw this team carry through, and really in that national championship game against TCU, unfortunately for the Horned Frogs, Georgia was just able to take all that anger, doubt, edge that you bring up and take it on to TCU. And I'll say this, I know TCU was an overmatched opponent, that's fine. They would have beaten Alabama by 35 the way they played that day. They would have beaten Michigan by 35 the way they played that day. The opponent on that game did not matter. Georgia knew that was a chance to make the statement of all statements. Having beaten Ohio State in a game, I thought at times they played a little tight and maybe felt the pressure a little bit. They knew when they got to the national title game, hey, look, last year's team won 14 games. Let's go ahead and make it 15 and make this a further statement about just how great this team is.
I got more for Connor Riley. Let me show you this, though, on the screen. A really cool thing, our friends at Jittery Joe's partnering with UGA to celebrate back-to-back national championships. A lot of you love the commemorative national championship stuff. With this great coffee can from our friends at Jittery Joe's, a great way for you to take advantage of that. Obviously, historic season. Our friends at Jittery Joe's, while supplies last, have this coffee can there for you to celebrate all that. Let me see if I can turn. There you go. Now you can see the way it's supposed to be. Really, really good-looking thing. Celebrating back-to-back national championships. Also, the great coffee from Jittery Joe's right here inside there as well. Coming from that great region of the world that makes such great coffee. Beans from Colombia and from Nicaragua and Guatemala. Right here to make the great Jittery Joe's coffee that you already know and love and enjoy, and in the special commemorative back-to-back national championships can here. So you've heard it said before, how about them dogs? Well, how about that coffee from our friends at Jittery Joe's? To find out more about this, go to jitteryjoes.com. That is jitteryjoes.com. Get your special commemorative back-to-back national champions coffee cans here with the 100% Arabica bean coffee from our friends at Jittery Joe's. You can enjoy some of that today. It is really good stuff. All right, Connor, before we let you go, I am contractually obligated to ask you what's next for Todd Monken. Super Bowl is over. Bieniemy seemingly in play for both Baltimore, maybe Washington. I guess outside chance Indianapolis is a head coaching candidate here there as well. What's next for Todd Monken? Are these jobs going to get filled? We're not going to hear anything about this. How does all this play out moving forward with Monken and his, seeming pursuit of NFL jobs?
Yeah, so I don't expect Todd Monken to be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator. I know there was a lot of talk early about that. I don't believe that's going to come to fruition. They're actually interviewing former Georgia running backs coach and former Georgia running back Thomas Brown for their offensive coordinator job for a second time this week. I believe that takes place today. The Indianapolis Colts have hired Shane Steichen, the Eagles offensive coordinator, to be their head coach.
Oh, wow.
So that is not a place that Bieniemy will end up going. It was announced, I believe, just before you came on today. So the only opening right now is the Arizona Cardinals, and it's believed that Jonathan Gannon, the Eagles defensive coordinator, is expected to get that job. I would say he is probably the favorite at this point in time. Bieniemy is the name to watch here. Eric Bieniemy, he's the Chiefs offensive coordinator. He does not call plays for the Chiefs, but he's a very coveted coach by both the Washington Commanders and the Baltimore Ravens. If he would take either of those jobs, he would have play calling responsibilities. So that would be why he would make that move in hopes of one day becoming a head coach. And look, Baltimore is really the only job that has shown an interest in Todd Monken. They have interviewed, I believe, 5 guys twice. And so I think, if you're a Georgia fan and you want Todd Monken to stay around, which just about everybody watching this program does, you are rooting for, I think, Eric Bieniemy to get that Ravens job. I think that would clear up a lot of the potential, doubt about where Monken might be and might be going next year. He has not interviewed with Washington yet, at least on the public knowledge side of things. And so I think if you're a Georgia fan right now and you're interested in keeping Todd Monken around for another year, I think if Todd Monken were offered the Ravens job, he would take it, but that has not been the case yet. And I think there's a clear interest from both Bieniemy's side and the Ravens side here as well. And Bieniemy is very clearly going to have options. And because of that, I think Bieniemy is absolutely the biggest name to watch in regards to what happens with Todd Monken.
Really good stuff, Connor. Appreciate that. I want to talk to you about SEC expansion today. We're out of time for now, so I will have to make sure we do that again here soon because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff for Georgia on that. We talked about that on Friday. I want to hear more from you on that too. So we'll do that again in the very near future. Connor, thanks so much for being here today. Appreciate that. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure, B.A. Thanks so much for having me on.
Appreciate it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC 3.
Yes, so a couple quick things there. The interesting feeling for me is, and I think that Connor was kind of alluding to this too, if I was a betting person, listen, plenty of my bets turn out to be incorrect, but if I was a betting person, my bet here would be that Monken's not going to get the Baltimore job, that they seem interested in a little bit different type of thing here. So maybe this does just sort of come to an end at some point in time, but I'm frequently wrong, so maybe I'm also wrong about this. Another thing that Connor pointed out is the rise of Thomas Brown, the former Georgia running back, within these NFL coaching circles. Boy, that's a great thing to see. The former Dogs who've made names for themselves in coaching, terrific to see. And Thomas Brown certainly seems to be a rising star in the NFL world here. And I think that's a great thing to see. So congratulations to him for that, as he seems to be in line for getting himself a pretty big job here this offseason. All right, we got Jake Fromm coming up in a moment. A couple of SEC stories to get to there as well. Before that, though, let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And obviously last night, a lot of the folks going to be on that DawgNation cruise kind of got together for a little bit of a informal meeting, a Zoom call to kind of talk about some of those things. I wish I could have been a part of that because I just wanted to express my excitement about this too. I'm so much looking forward to what we're going to be doing on board Independence of the Seas coming up this April for our DawgNation cruise. I truly can't wait for it. I think it's going to be a great time. And I would also encourage you to make this a great time to look at all kinds of opportunities to take Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. You're in 2023, so we head towards spring break. You think about the summer. You think about getting away from the cold weather in the winter, something I always recommend there as well. Well, Jessica Slater, who's a great travel agent from that was really introduced to us by Royal Caribbean, kind of specially selected for us for our Royal Caribbean cruise vacation needs. Jessica can help you out on all that. We have a cruise coming up. Some of you know that. My wife was on the phone with Jessica just the other day, kind of helping her out. She was helping us out with a couple of things, and so she's a really attentive, very, very good travel agent, and I can't recommend her enough. Royal Caribbean recommends her too, so give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Also, more information about the DawgNation cruise, which we're kind of getting close to now, but all kinds of stuff there as well. RoyalDogs.com. That's the website, RoyalDogs.com. You can find out information about Royal Caribbean, but also the great cruise opportunity, maybe a last-minute chance to sneak in there on board Independence of the Seas this April. I'm honestly not sure if we're sold out on that or not. We got to be close, but you can maybe find out more about that. Either way, can't wait to be on board Independence of the Seas with all of y'all coming up in April, and I got my own Royal Caribbean cruise coming up there as well, which I am so excited about. All right, before we get Jake Fromm, let me get a couple of SEC stories here real quick. I saw an interview the other day with Chris Del Conte, who is the Texas athletic director on the Paul Feinbaum show. And one of the things that Del Conte talked about was the future of rivalries for Texas now that they're moving the SEC. One of the things he expressed some excitement about renewing the Texas A&M rivalry, which obviously is the kind of thing that should be played. That's one of the good things about conference expansion, broadly speaking, is it brings a lot of rivalries back into play again like this, something that should have been the case to begin with. I think that Texas-Arkansas is a really fun rivalry. It seems like they're pretty excited about that there as well. But the other thing that Del Conte said, which I thought was really interesting, is is when you look at the Texas-Oklahoma rivalry, what we used to call the Red River Shootout, they call it like Red River Rivalry now, wherever it is they called it. Del Conte expressed his, I guess, belief that game is going to remain in Dallas. As many of you are aware, that's another one of those sort of big, famous neutral site games every year that's played at the Texas State Fair. Obviously, that kind of resonates with us a little bit because Georgia, Florida for such a long time has been played in Jacksonville. You've also had Texas A&M, Arkansas, which has been played at Jerry World. We know that's about to come to an end. We know both sides there kind of want to go into a home and home situation there when it comes to Texas A&M, Arkansas. As we said on Friday's show, there is some belief that the future of the Georgia-Florida game there in Jacksonville could be pretty uncertain, that you could kind of be heading for pretty big change there. But if Arkansas A&M we know is changing, Georgia-Florida we believe could change, Chris Del Conte letting it be known that if he had his way, Texas-Oklahoma would remain at the State Fair. That would remain a neutral site game. So this could be an interesting comparison here in the future. If, some who are predicting that Georgia-Florida may go to a home-and-home situation, that does happen, that's not necessarily a guarantee that Texas-Oklahoma would do the same thing. It sort of seems like the feeling around that rivalry is they wouldn't mind kind of keeping that on the basis of a neutral site type deal. So interesting stuff from Del Conte on the Feinbaum show, sort of expressing his belief and I guess his assumption that Texas-Oklahoma is going to remain neutral site there at the Texas State Fair, the old Cotton Bowl Stadium each and every year, while maybe a rivalry like Georgia-Florida is not destined to remain neutral site there in Jacksonville. So you could see a little bit of a difference there on that. This is not really an SEC story, but I did want to mention this anyway. So a lot of you know that Tommy Rees, the former Notre Dame offensive coordinator, has left Notre Dame to go to Alabama. And in the aftermath of that, Notre Dame has also now been looking for its own new offensive coordinator. And one of the guys they apparently showed some interest in was Andy Ludwig, the offensive coordinator at Utah. But ultimately, it sounds like Notre Dame has kind of balked at the idea of paying a buyout for Ludwig that was somewhere in the neighborhood of $2+ million, whatever else. And I just think that for those of us who kind of live so entrenched in the SEC, I think we sort of forget how different business gets done other places from time to time, because in the SEC, there's nobody around here that would blink at all about having to pay a couple $1 million to free up an offensive coordinator if that's what you wanted to do. But at a place like Notre Dame, they seem to be a lot more judicious about how they spend money, despite the fact they've got about as much money as anybody does because of all the media rights deals they've had and things like that. So very interesting to kind of see that playing out there. Notre Dame having a chance to hire an offensive coordinator, at least seemingly, but maybe balking at the need to pay the buyout to do that. And you're just reminded here in this day and age of finances and money and how it impacts college football that even of the kind of the moneyed class, not everybody sort of views money the same way. Maybe Notre Dame an example of that. It will make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We're going to try to catch up with Jake Fromm here in just a moment. A little bit of an issue there getting him on the phone. I'll also take a moment to mention we also have a little bit of an issue, I guess, today on Facebook. So apologize for that. I don't quite know what's going on. I just made aware of that during the show. But so for those of you who normally watch on Facebook, somehow, some way, Big Tech playing a little defense against us. So we'll see if we can figure all of that out. But hopefully you're able to move to another platform for that. With that said, we'll switch over here. We'll get ready to talk now. As part of a Kroger Fresh Take to the great former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily. Always great to have him. Jake, thanks for being with us here today. Hope you're doing well.
Hey, Brandon, what's going on? Glad to be here. Out doing a little bit of a throwing session.
Oh, nice.
Off-season stuff has started, so getting ready and trying to get right.
That's good to hear. I'm happy to hear you out there doing that. Of course, we can't wait to see what the future holds for you, Jake, there in Washington. That's a lot of fun to see. And by the way, I guess speaking of quarterbacks, we just saw the Super Bowl on Sunday. When you see what Patrick Mahomes does when he, battling clearly what was a pretty significant ankle sprain type situation, obviously probably dealing with a good bit of pain, and yet once again he kind of has this heroic performance, winning for himself a second Super Bowl. I know you're kind of a student of the game. You like following other quarterbacks. You're sort of a fan of the sport. At this point in time, do you think we have to start sort of making room in the conversation of kind of all-time great quarterbacks, that Patrick Mahomes is now kind of a part of that? Not quite to the Tom Brady level yet, but kind of in the same neighborhood, and maybe in comparison to guys like Peyton Manning and maybe guys from when I was growing up, like, say, John Elway, Joe Montana? Are we getting closer to needing to put Patrick Mahomes in a conversation like that?
I mean, for sure. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is a special football player. He's a great guy, well respected around the league. And, I mean, what he's done on the football field in just the short time of his career is just nothing short of special for sure. Winning the Super Bowl last night, I mean, he just keep adding on to his already kind of miraculous resume. He's a young player still. He's got a long career ahead of him. So he's definitely doing the right things to put himself in those conversations. And, I mean, honestly, it's just going to be fun keeping up and watching his career, throughout his life. And, I mean, he's definitely going to be right there for sure in the conversation.
I'm obviously not a former player, so when I watch games like this, I'm always curious. You played Rose Bowl game, one of the biggest college games anyone can play, and you played a national championship game. When you're on the big stage like that, like these guys were in the Super Bowl on Sunday, does the game feel different, or does it? I mean, obviously every player always tries to say, hey, we don't make this feel like any other game. But when the spotlight is obviously so different, and you know this from your college career, are you able to make that feel like any other game, or do you have to embrace, because of the fact that, we're playing on a Monday night, you got the big spotlight here, you got all of this, this is just going to feel different than a normal game, and as a player, I just sort of have to be okay with that. Mentally, how do you approach all of that?
Mentally, if you can eliminate all the distractions, all the stuff going around outside of the football game, the football aspect of the game actually, in my opinion, just gets much simpler. It comes down to more fundamentals, more technique, more about taking care of the football. Like, if you watch these games, I mean, it's about the turnover battle. It's just a very simplified football game. So, man, to me, if I can just eliminate those distractions and I can just get to the grass, man, and just play simple football, let loose, let my mind be free, you can really have a lot of fun playing it.
One of the things that's kind of happened since you and I had a chance to talk last is the fact that we now know for sure the SEC is expanding in 2024. Texas and Oklahoma are coming into the league, and that's also going to bring about a good bit of change. I guess just sort of big picture speaking here, what is your thought about SEC expansion and, the fact that the SEC is going to look very, very different, sooner rather than later? What's been your reaction to a lot of this?
Yeah, all I know is 2024 college football season is going to be absolutely crazy. A lot going on. You got USC and I believe UCLA going over to the Big Ten. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of expansion of the playoff. I mean, it's just going to be a different college football atmosphere throughout the course of that season. So that's going to be fun to watch. And hopefully don't, skip past, this 2023 season looking ahead because this one's going to be special as well. But, man, there's a lot going on, and I really don't even know where to start because it's just going to be all thrown in all at one time, and I think it's going to be pretty hectic.
So, Jake, this is coming out right as we are talking here. This is happening here right now, not what I thought we would be discussing. And, frankly, but Baltimore Ravens have hired Todd Monken. This is now official. It has happened. This is the official Ravens account here. Yeah, the Ravens have hired Todd Monken. This happening just a couple of minutes ago. Jake, in the last 10:50 this morning, so 8 minutes ago, this happened. So this is something that you and I have talked plenty about. And now it's not a hypothetical. Now it is real. Todd Monken leaving to go to the Baltimore Ravens. What do you think about this, Jake?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, kind of a crazy move in my opinion, but I know Coach Monken's going to be happy that he is back in the NFL and just, with the pros and that kind of day-to-day schedule and getting to compete at the highest level. But, man, as a Georgia football fan, I kind of hate it, honestly, because I thought he did some great things here. I thought he was putting together a really good staff and a really good, just an offensive skill set, scheme, and identity here. So that's going to be very interesting to see who Coach Smart can find to fill that void. I mean, I know there's a lot of coaches in that quarterback room. I know Coach Bobo's here, so we'll see. Maybe this comes full circle with Coach Bobo, but it's definitely going to be interesting for Coach Smart here in the next couple days.
I mean, in the case of Monken, and you kind of touched on this, some guys just want to be in the NFL, right? I mean, it's obviously a very different league. I think you and I talked about that last week. There isn't the recruiting. There isn't the need to kind of deal with sometimes younger players, which maybe brings a different kind of challenge. The NFL obviously presents its own challenges. But for some people, that's just the preferable league to be in. We've seen college coaches leave and go to the NFL on a more regular basis the last couple of years. And I won't pretend to know what's in Monken's mind here. But it could be that, he just sort of felt like he had unfinished business in the NFL, and this was just the league he wanted to be in. After bringing 2 national championships to Georgia, Jake, I'm a big Georgia fan myself. After bringing that level of success here, if this is what Monken wants, then I don't know that I can necessarily fault him for wanting that.
Yeah, I can't fault him. I completely understand as an NFL football player, man. It's an exclusive club. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I mean, there's only 32 positions, an offensive coordinator position is only 32 head coaches. So, it's just a very tight-knit group. It's exclusive. So I completely understand. And, you want to compete at the highest level. How are you going to fault someone for wanting to compete and be their best at the highest level with the best? So I get it.
And then you mentioned the Mike Bobo situation. Obviously, we don't know what Kirby Smart's going to do in terms of making this replacement, but it has been kind of kicked around and discussed. Well, hey, does maybe, Georgia have a capable replacement because Bobo has been offensive coordinator here before. He's been offensive coordinator at 2 other spots in the SEC. How well do you know Mike Bobo, and what would you think about the idea that he could be the replacement, sort of waiting in the wings for Todd Monken here?
In my opinion, he would be my front runner to get it. So, he's got plenty of experience. He's been the offensive coordinator here before in the past, had a lot of success. And so, yeah, he's a proven play caller, and that's something that really can't be taken for granted as a proven play caller in this day and time of college football. So, he'd be the guy at the top of my head right now.
So let me finish with this then, because, a lot of Georgia fans obviously feel like they, know about Bobo because he was, once coordinator here, but, you've had a chance to probably get to know him personally here a bit there as well. What is something about Bobo the average Georgia fan might not know? If he ends up being tabbed, if he ends up being the guy, he's certainly, you would imagine, going to be considered here. What is something you've seen from your, close connection that remains with the program about Bobo that the average fan might not be aware of?
Yeah, Coach Bobo, he's definitely utilized his tight ends in his past, knows how to use tight ends. He's great at the play action, scheme, and passing game. And I think, him going off, being a head coach, learning from those experiences, being a quarterback coach under Todd Monken, being able to kind of use some of that scheme that Coach Monken was using, and then being a play caller before. And then, Coach Bobo, he loves Georgia, too. His family grew up in the state of Georgia. They love Georgia, so I know he's going to want to do and be his best for the university here. So,
all right. Jake, appreciate your thoughts on this. We'll let you get back, throw that football again, and continue doing that workout. Thanks for being here as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take here today.
Absolutely, Brandon. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, good stuff there. Kroger Fresh Take. By the way, don't forget, when it comes to Valentine's Day, which is today, Kroger's got you covered on all that. Kroger.com/Valentine's. Get in there and get your last-minute gift card needs, your greeting cards, candy, stuff for special meal, sweet treats, cupcakes, things like that, all that great stuff to make Valentine's Day special for the significant other in your life, your kids, because gosh knows my kids, they expect Valentine's Day to be like Christmas Junior. Some of y'all are kind of the same way with that with your own family. Kroger.com/Valentine's for more on that. And I got to tell you, I am pretty surprised. Now, listen, when I say surprised, I don't mean like, I had no idea what Monken was going to do, what the Ravens were going to do. But it seemed like he'd gotten a little bit quiet there on that front. There wasn't this huge groundswell of support from Ravens fans for Monken necessarily. There'd been this chatter that they're interested in talking to Eric Bieniemy, and Bieniemy was interested in talking to them. And here we are, 2 days removed from the Super Bowl, and then boom, Ravens just announced that Monken is hired. He is the guy there. This happening. It is real. It is happening. It had been long speculated about, and now it is a thing. Todd Monken, after leading Georgia to back-to-back national championships, at least in part leading Georgia to that. He's certainly been a big part of the success here of back-to-back national championships. Going back to the NFL, he had, at one point in time kind of mentioned some regrets about the way that the last stint he had in the league went when he was offensive coordinator in title with the Cleveland Browns, but not calling plays there. That was a frustrating situation for him during that year. I think that's been, fairly openly reported on. I think that Monken has also kind of expressed, going back to some of the press conferences he did around the college football playoff, that he had some, personal disappointment about maybe how some of that got handled. And sounds like he wanted another chance in the NFL, and that's what the Baltimore Ravens potentially get for him to work with head coach John Harbaugh. We'll see if Lamar Jackson remains in place there at quarterback. But this is real. It is a thing. Todd Monken is leaving Georgia, and we'll certainly have plenty to cover as it comes to with all of that about what might be happening next year on that. And when you hear that news, maybe you feel like you need a little bit of a beverage, a little bit of a cocktail. Well, if that be the case, our friends at the Finish Long Drink got you covered on all of that. In fact, you'd even get one of those 8-can variety packs, 2 different cans of each of the 4 Finish Long Drink varieties. The Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol volume. Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. Long Drink Traditional, the blue can. Citrus flavored, Gin Kick, Long Drink Cranberry. All of that online, thelongdrink.com. You can learn more about the 4 different Finnish long drink varieties. You can hear more about the great story. Started in Helsinki when the Summer Games were there back in the 1950s. Popular in Finland forever, but now here in America for the last couple of years, and in Georgia now too, and pretty much everywhere. And if you put your zip code in there, you can find out where you can pick some up. The Finnish long drink, really good stuff. You'll love it. Try it at thelongdrink.com. So if you're watching on video, we're going to stay here live. We're going to talk a little bit more about this. If you are podcast, obviously, we're going to have plenty of coverage on this, too, about where Georgia goes next. You hear a pretty forceful endorsement from Jake Fromm there on Mike Bobo. We'll see, how that resonates here in the future. But if you're just joining us live, the Ravens have hired Todd Monken as offensive coordinator. So let's wrap up the podcast, and we'll sort of figure out where all of this goes from here. Seems a little anticlimactic to do a golden shoe on the heels of all of this, but we'll do one anyway in honor of Valentine's Day. I thought this was really funny. I guess the Redcoat Band made these, but someone shared them with me, and so I'll share with you here right now. Bubba writing to say, Happy Valentine's Day, and sharing this in the Redcoat Band. Very funny, Valentine card like you used to give out in your elementary school class, saying, I'll never let you down. It's Jalen Carter holding up Jaden Daniels. That's very funny. The other one says, you must be the national championship trophy because I'm going to take you home. So there you go. Pretty funny stuff. Bubba sharing that courtesy of our friends at the Redcoat Band. Really good golden shoe indeed. We started today's show by talking about the lousy stinking Gators. We will finish by talking about them there as well and remind you that 256 days from right now, Georgia goes back to Jacksonville, beats up on Florida again. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We'll see all of you tomorrow on DawgNation Daily. Actually, not tomorrow because of my grandmother's funeral, but we'll obviously be back this week here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then. So, and on video, crazy day here right now. Let me plug in here for a second. So, crazy day here right now as the Todd Monken news breaks. Literally just a few minutes ago, we were in the fortunate position of being able to react with Jake Fromm right there as that happens. Thought Fromm gave you some good stuff on that. And Fromm was also, Jake was pretty outspoken last week about his belief that he was one of the few people that I knew that actually said, hey, the longer this goes on, it is a distraction. If I'm a quarterback, I want to know who my offensive coordinator is. I want to know about my verbiage. I want to know about my play calling. I want to know what the offense is going to feel like. Fromm, as a quarterback, said that last week. And so I guess now maybe the one small silver lining to all of this might be the fact that there is no more uncertainty. You know for sure what is happening. Maybe the Georgia team itself has known, more about this on the inside for quite some time. But whatever cloud existed around Monken's future, it's gone away because Monken is going away. He is leaving. So you can react to that, and you can talk about all of that, and we'll just kind of see where you're going. We also have issue on Facebook today, and I apologize for that. So hopefully you migrated over to YouTube probably for the show today, or maybe DawgNation.com on that. So we will we'll see how it goes here. Brandon Pratt says watching a Mike Bobo offense is as exciting as watching a Jim Chaney offense. Yeah, I just simply don't agree. I just simply don't agree. And listen, reasonable people can disagree. But But I think that some of y'all are way too hard on Mike Bobo. I just do. And it seems weird to sort of relitigate something that happened almost 10 years ago now, and in some cases more than 10 years ago. But there will be no complaints from me if Mike Bobo is hired as offensive coordinator. And Jake Fromm, kind of gave his voice on this too. I simply don't think it should be viewed as bad news if Georgia hires Mike Bobo. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina, also not a fan of Bobo either. But there you go. Let's see what else. Low Elo Joe says Bobo is predictable. I don't need that in my play caller. So there you go. There you go. I mean, look, here's a couple things. When you win back-to-back national championships, you should expect to lose a significant assistant coach that helped make that possible. It'd be very, very hard to imagine that you could do that and hold on to that staff beyond that. So obviously losing Todd Monken has the feeling of, gosh, it's kind of disappointing because, I think that Monken was a transformational figure. And to his credit, he talked about being a transformational figure. With the Georgia offense. I had a chance to talk to him about that back in Los Angeles. He was pretty open about, how that offense was transformed, the role that he played in getting that done. So it is just a thing that when you win a national championship, you lose a guy that helped make that possible. In this case for Georgia, it's Todd Monken. So if you're saying, well, by comparison, anybody you hire is maybe less exciting for you than what Monken was, I totally get that. But this is still a program that won back-to-back national championships. And Kirby is as competitive as anybody in going, as we say, go for 3 and 23. Kirby is as competitive as anybody in trying to get that done again here this year. It is, and I'm not trying to be overly simplistic, and I'm not trying to be a jerk, I'm not trying to be snarky. It is fairly obvious that if Smart hires Bobo, he doesn't have the same feeling about Mike that many of you do. So on this, I'm sort of willing to go with Kirby on that. And like Taylor Russell says, Mike Bobo has zero imagination. I mean, look, I'm trying to be candid about this without saying what I kind of want to say on that. Go back and look at some of the numbers. Go back and look at 2014 when Georgia averaged more than 40-plus points per game. I don't think you get to that total without some play calling chops. I just don't think you do. And I think if you want to go back and look at that era of Georgia football, to me, the era that started with 2008, that was the year in which Georgia was preseason number 1. And if you want to go back and say 07, that's fine. But to me, there's a sort of era for Georgia football where starting in 2008, they were preseason number 1. They obviously did not finish anywhere near that, and they were sort of never the same program again. They came close in 2012, but they got blown out South Carolina. To me, you can sort of split the Richt era in half. It's 2001 through 2007, where Georgia really seemed like it was building something that was knocking on the door to winning a national championship. And then in 2008, beyond, that's sort of the stark reality era where you sort of realize, oh, actually, they're trending away from where they once been, that the rest of the SEC teams are getting better. Georgia's having a hard time keeping pace. But to me, you can sort of split the Richt era into sort of two hemispheres, 01 to 07, and then 08 through 2015. It's almost the exact same number of years, too, which makes it even a little bit easier to maybe do there as well. So let's diagnose what happened 2008 to 2015. Like, why is it that Georgia didn't win a national championship? On the list of things that held Georgia back, I would get to so many things before I got to Mike Bobo just wasn't a good enough offensive coordinator. I really do believe that's the case. I think that Bobo drew a lot of ire, during the games because the spotlight's kind of always on who is your offensive play caller. That's just sort of the way that it all goes. But Georgia's biggest issue back then were, lines of scrimmage. How many offensive and defensive linemen was Georgia putting into the NFL, especially the high draft pick type stuff? How many offensive and defensive linemen was Georgia putting into the NFL, in that 08 through 2015 period? Who was calling plays for Georgia defensively in a lot of those years. That's the stuff. Look at the defensive coordinator. How much quarterback depth did Georgia have? During some of that time. Those are issues for me that ended up being more significant than whatever Mike Bobo was or wasn't. So if Georgia hires Bobo, my overall feeling on this is going to be that, boy, Georgia was in a good position to have a capable, qualified replacement who had spent this past year working in the program. That's going to be my reaction to this, and we'll see if it's successful because, obviously, Mike was not successful in his last two stints in the SEC. I don't mind telling you that at South Carolina and Auburn. I would also say that both those situations were far different than the situation that Mike would find here if he indeed gets the job. And, in comparison to a guy like Buster Faulkner, who I like, and who I think has, a bright future at Georgia, was certainly a pretty impactful figure, I think, when it comes to Georgia's recruiting stuff, and, someone that Stetson Bennett seemed to have a really good relationship with, so that kind of speaks to value there too. Faulkner is nowhere near as experienced as Bobo is. He's just not. And, for some of you, your most favorable characteristic for Faulkner is that he's just simply not Bobo. And I don't think that's the proper evaluation here, is that Georgia's trying for a third straight national championship. They're going to want, I believe, more experience at offensive coordinator than what Faulkner brings to the table. Now, they know Buster very, very well, and it could be that Buster's back working at Georgia again at some point in time, and it could be, I guess, that if they were to consider him here for this right now, I wouldn't bat my eye at that really either necessarily. But if I had to guess, I'd say the experience that Bobo has is probably more valuable for them than what maybe Faulkner brings to the table, if I had to guess. Thomas Bolton talking about the success that both Aaron Murray and David Green had after working, with Mike Bobo. Obviously, in the Green era, that was the early days of Bobo as a coach, and certainly with Aaron Murray, obviously that was the prime of the Bobo era there as offensive coordinator. Stacey Merritt, I don't disagree with what Stacey's saying there. Miriam Corbin, the subject of Joe Brady, yeah. Like, Joe Brady's going to always kind of be that guy that's out there. Well, just go get Joe Brady. I don't think that Joe Brady wants anything to do with college football. I don't. There are a lot of coaches out there right now who I don't think want anything to do with college football. Thomas Brown may be an example of that. I won't pretend to know what Thomas Brown's thinking about anything. But Thomas Brown has been an NFL coach now for quite some time. This idea, let's bring Thomas Brown home. Thomas Brown may love Georgia football, but he may not love coaching in college football, because coaching in college football is just a different thing right now. Todd Monken, who just won 2 national championships at Georgia, seems pretty intent to just move around to the NFL, because for a lot of coaches, the NFL game just feels different than college football does. In Joe Brady's case, his profile has dropped dramatically, and yet you still don't get much of any indication that he wants back in the college game. He's content just to be a quarterback's coach or whatever he is after being a failed head coach. I thought that Brady was a remarkable architect of the 2019 LSU offense, and really one of the most impactful single-season coaching performances I've ever seen. But there is zero evidence to suggest that Brady wants any part of college football right now, and there are a lot of coaches in the NFL who feel the exact same way. Let's see what else. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a second. All right, so it's being reported, I guess. I haven't seen this. Is that out there, Mike? Michael, you're seeing that? Okay, so I guess The Athletic is reporting that Mike Bobo will be the next Georgia offensive coordinator, which is not a huge surprise. This had been, kind of rumbled at, so I guess we can we'll take this report seriously and assume that that's where all of this is heading. And I think if you're Kirby Smart, this sets up a very comfortable situation for you, where one of your best friends is a co-defensive coordinator, one of your best friends is an offensive coordinator. And listen, you can listen to a lot of the stuff that Kirby Smart has said. The idea of burnout, of fatigue, of just getting sort of fed up with the whole thing, that's real for a lot of coaches, and Smart has acknowledged that. If you're a Georgia fan, you want to prevent this from happening for Kirby if you possibly can. You want to keep that from happening if you possibly can. So a few years of working with close friends and a few years of having the comfort that a staff like this could create, that could end up being a good thing for you there as well, because it might, keep Kirby it might just keep him happier just a little bit longer, which would not maybe be all that bad of a thing. Let's see what else. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a second over here. And Michael, I know you asked me this off the air earlier, but if Connor or Mike or any of those guys, if they want to join us, tell them they can hop in there. Are you getting me on this? Yeah, so if they want to hop in here, they can. Dan in Arkansas says big changes to the current offensive system when it comes to Bobo. Yeah, I guess that remains to be seen. I mean, one of the things we saw at Alabama for quite some time is that knowing that turnover was just a given, knowing that was just an expectation when it comes to that coaching staff, that Saban kind of created what he sort of thought of as the Alabama offense, terminology, play calls, tendencies, and the new offensive coordinator at any given time was expected to adapt to that more so than whatever else. And I'd say that had its good points, and I would say that in recent years maybe that's had maybe not quite such good points. So we'll see. We'll see if there's a Georgia offense in place and Bobo is expected to evolve to fit it, or if the Georgia offense will now evolve a little bit in a direction that Mike Bobo would like to see it go into. We'll have to see about that. Richard D says, can you compare the talent level to the previous Georgia era to the one that Bobo will have now? I think Richard's asking the question because he knows there really is no comparison. This is obviously a much more talented Georgia roster than anything Bobo would have ever had before, and frankly, a much more talented Georgia roster than almost anybody in college football could have ever have imagined before. There are potentially lots of folks who have the potential of leading a successful Georgia offense. The guy that Kirby knows, the guy that Kirby's comfortable with, is Mike Bobo, and so apparently that's what it's going to be. Roger W. says the three of them working together, Bobo, Muschamp, Kirby, is the kind of thing that could create some long-term stability, which for Georgia, I believe, would be very valuable. And I don't think that you can, I don't think you can discount that, discredit that. Joe Garliardi on Todd Monken moving along. Monken was obviously a very, very good coach here at Georgia. A very, very good coach here at Georgia. There's no doubt about that. And there is some, I don't mind telling you this, there is some pressure on Mike Bobo to perform in 2023, just given how good the Georgia offense has been the last, I would say, 3 years. I think the 2020 Georgia offense was actually pretty good. You compare that, knowing the weirdness of the schedule, playing only SEC teams, you compare that to previous seasons, the Georgia offense actually held up pretty well right there. So we talk about back-to-back national championships, but I think the 2020 Monken season was actually pretty good. And then prior to that, in 2019, the Georgia offense, I don't mind telling you this, was terrible. Georgia offense was terrible. So, to be the next guy after Todd Monken creates a level of pressure. And I think that if you're Kirby Smart, you embrace that pressure in terms of, hiring a guy like Bobo. And I think if you're Mike Bobo, I think you embrace that pressure too. There is pressure to perform here. No one denies that. And the high bar that Monken sets maybe makes the pressure a little higher. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Let's see what else. Senior Dog 54 says our quarterbacks will be elite fundamentally under Bobo. He's got a great rep in that regard in the coaching community. I think that's probably true. I think these quarterbacks are probably comfortable with the idea of Mike Bobo teaching and tutoring them. I think that's probably true. I think you could make the case for that. Johnny Prescott says, let's avoid the natty or bust stuff. Championships are hard to come by. I don't disagree with that. Championships are hard to come by, but I think for Georgia, this is true prior to back-to-back national championships. I would say it's definitely true after back-to-back national championships. That Georgia's success is determined by whether or not it wins a national championship, and yet that is not a guarantee that you define a successful season by winning a national championship at a place like Georgia, but more seasons than not aren't going to finish that way. That's what makes national championships actually special. All right, Connor Riley joins us here a couple of minutes after we were just talking. Connor, I have to admit, I'm pretty surprised by this. I thought that the Monken chatter around Baltimore had seemingly kind of gotten quiet. It's not an inside report or anything like that. It just sort of seemed like it got kind of quiet. And yet here we are, just shortly after you and I finished speaking a moment ago. It's now official. Todd Monken going to the Ravens. Athletic reporting that Mike Bobo, next offensive coordinator here at Georgia. So I guess take it wherever you want to go here. News we've been following now for quite some time. Looks like it's all falling into place.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that Todd Monken took the Ravens offensive coordinator job. I guess I'm just surprised that this offer came so quickly, especially given the reports of the interest of Eric Bieniemy in this job. As far as what comes next, look, I've already seen the comments out there about Mike Bobo. Look, you have a lot of preconceived, not you, but there are a lot of fans out there that have a lot of preconceived notions about Mike Bobo that stem from an era where Georgia, quite frankly, was just nowhere near as talented as this team is going to be under Kirby Smart going forward. Look, you can point to the success or lack thereof at South Carolina and Auburn. I think those are wildly different offenses and talent levels that he's going to be working with. There was no Brock Bowers on the 2020 South Carolina team. There was no Ladd McConkey on that 2021 Auburn team. I think Bobo has proven that he is a very capable play caller at this level. Is he Todd Monken? We'll see. But again, Todd Monken is one of the better offensive coordinators that Georgia or college football has seen in recent history. There's a reason he's going to call plays at the NFL level now. As far as Bobo, look, you can complain about him all you want, but the reality is the last time he was the offensive coordinator at Georgia, that offense averaged 41.3 points per game with Hudson Mason at quarterback and losing Todd Gurley for much of that season, the best player on that offense that year. And yet that offense still found a way to be productive week in, week out. And I have no doubt that with Brock Bowers coming back, 4 starters on the offensive line, some talented running backs as well as Ladd McConkey and a talented wide receiver room as well, Georgia's offense is going to be just fine next year. And I would venture to guess one of the better ones in college football.
But that said, and I agree with you, I think what's likely true. I'm also willing to acknowledge what I think a lot of the anti-Bobo folks want to have on the record is that he does have pressure to perform because Todd Monken was extraordinary. I was even saying this before you joined us. The 21-22 were obviously back-to-back national championship years. I thought that Monken's offense in 2020 was actually pretty good. 2 different quarterbacks, playing an SEC-only schedule, very weird type of year. I thought Monken was actually a pretty good offensive coordinator for Georgia in 2020 there as well, and we all know my feelings on the 2019 situation prior to that. I think the Georgia offense was just bad. It was just a bad offense. So you had a bad coordinator in place in 2019. You greatly upgraded that in 2020. It eventually resulted in 2 national championships. Now it's Mike Bobo being hired as the replacement because of how high Todd Monken has set the bar. That does put more pressure now on Bobo to perform because of that.
Right, but that pressure was going to exist regardless of whether Bobo was hired or not. They could have hired Zach Robinson. They could have hired Thomas Brown. Hell, they could have hired Cliff Kingsbury to be the offensive coordinator here, and there would have been fans putting pressure on whoever that next offensive coordinator is to replace Monken. That speaks to how well of a job Monken did here at Georgia. And look, Mike Bobo knows that that's sort of what he's walking into here at the University of Georgia. There's some past history here, but again, I think Kirby Smart has earned the right to show, hey, this is the guy that can lead our next offense going forward. He made that hire when I can tell you right now, not a lot of fans knew a whole lot about Todd Monken as a college offensive play caller, as a college offensive coordinator. In 2020, when he had been hired, he just had a pretty disastrous year with the Cleveland Browns in more ways than one. And 3 years later, he's been pretty universally lauded as one of the best play callers in college football. Kirby Smart, with the exception of James Coley, and it should be noted here that was a disaster of a hire, has been pretty good when it comes to hiring coordinators. You lose Dan Lanning this past offseason while you replace him with Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp there. I think this Georgia offense next season, I'm going to be interested to see how it evolves. I do think this has some impact on the quarterback position going forward, just given – I do think this maybe makes it a bit more of a fair or balanced competition going forward, simply because I think when you look at the experience that Beck had in Todd Monken's system, and yes, this is going to be a different offense next year with Mike Bobo calling it. It just is. There's only one Todd Monken out there. I do think this makes the quarterback decision on what it looks like going forward a little bit more interesting in terms of who does what.
Well, I'd also add to this, too. Gunnar Stockton at one point in time was a South Carolina commit. It's not the –
because of Mike Bobo.
That's exactly right. It's not the biggest secret in the world that Gunnar – has had a relationship with the Bobo family. That was obviously a guy that they knew a lot about. Gunner's obviously a great prospect in his own right there as well. I think it is fair to wonder if the Bobo presence here – listen, ultimately Mike Bobo's going to choose the right quarterback for UGA. This is not going to be about relationships. But Gunner was a big-time prospect who wanted to go to South Carolina because of Mike Bobo. Well, now Mike Bobo is his offensive coordinator here at Georgia. I mean, I think it's fair to wonder if the presence of Bobo brings Gunner into the quarterback competition. I mean, he was already, I think, a pretty big part of this, but even now more so because of the presence of Bobo as offensive coordinator.
I would agree with that. I think you and I have heard the same sort of chatter that Gunner Stockton really impressed his teammates and coaches last year with the strides that he made and the ability that he came in. We heard Kirby Smart talk about him after the national championship game, the willingness to throw off the black jersey and say, "Hey, against TCU, like let's empty the chamber. If you guys want to hit me, please hit me." And I think there's a lot of respect on this team for Gunner Stockton. And if he continues to make strides and show that he can be the player that best executes Mike Bobo's offense, I do think there's a world where he is the starting quarterback. But again, at this point right now, I also think that if that's going to happen, Carson Beck has to do something to lose the starting quarterback job. I do think he is the favorite to be the guy next season at this point in time. And now, having said that, he was expected to be the backup quarterback in 2021, and he lost that job to Stetson Bennett. So it's not unprecedented, but as talented as Gunner Stockton is, as talented as Brock Vandagriff is, I do think that Carson Beck is probably still your week one starter, but it does make the quarterback competition all the more interesting in terms of what Georgia and Mike Bobo is ultimately going to elect to do. And also going forward, how he chooses to adapt this offense. It was a lot of single back. You did have some fullbacks in there, but with the way the tight end position has been developed at Georgia, specifically under Todd Hartley in recent years, I have to imagine that you're still going to see plenty of tight end heavy sets. And that's point out there as well. Mike Bobo had a lot of success with tight ends. Arthur Lynch, Orson Welles, Leonard Pope. There was a lot of really talented tight ends to come through Georgia the first time Mike Bobo was here, and I don't expect that to change in the slightest now that he's back calling plays once again.
To be fair, I think we're going for Orson Charles as opposed to Orson Welles. Orson Welles, terrific, and what was the famous movie?
He directed Citizen Kane.
Yeah, terrific in Citizen Kane, but no Rosebud on the field here for the Georgia Bulldogs. I say that kiddingly. So let me play some devil's advocate stuff here for a minute. Kind of, I'm going to put myself in the position of the skeptic on all of this here for a moment. I want you to give me your thoughts on some of this. This is what the skeptic might say about the Bobo hire here, which is, this is Kirby Smart not really executing a full-fledged search. It's just him hiring his friend. What would you say in response to that?
Couldn't you say the same thing about hiring Will Muschamp?
Yeah, and it's funny, without getting too deep into the weeds on all this, I think that Mike Bobo was a better offensive coordinator than Will Muschamp was as a defensive coordinator, at least on the basis of some statistical stuff. And Muschamp did not deal with much of this way that Mike Bobo is right now. Go back and look at and listen. I think Muschamp's an outstanding coach. I think in the right circumstances, his head coaching tenure could have been far different. But go back and look at his last year's DC for Auburn. It was not great, and yet he didn't seemingly deal with anywhere near as much as what Mike Bobo is sort of dealing with right now.
Right, and to counter that, look, because of the fact that Kirby is much more involved on defense, you can understand that level of skepticism there. But what button has Kirby Smart not pushed that would lead you to believe that he's now no longer interested in winning titles? Like, the goal is still to win a national championship every year at Georgia, and he's raised that bar. He understands that better than anyone. He's the guy that set the championship level standard at Georgia. And so I am willing to give Kirby Smart the benefit of the doubt that if he believes Mike Bobo is the best coach for this job, he probably is. And again, there is something to be said. There's a lot of talent on this team next season. And, not much. I don't think they needed to go outside and bring in a new hire and overhaul an offense. Mike Bobo was with this team last year. I do think that does help a little bit. He's seen this quarterback room. He's worked with these guys there as well. He's been a part of this championship culture. We hear so many different players say, "Hey, Georgia, it's not for everyone." Georgia pretty clearly is for Mike Bobo, and I think he's going to fit in well here on this staff. And you heard Kirby Smart talk so much this past year, and this shouldn't be lost, about the connectivity with this staff, about how these guys all fit and mesh together and how special it was. And that was having to replace 4 on-field assistants from last year. Well, Mike Bobo, I think, is an extension of that coaching staff and what Georgia brings in. And so because of that familiarity, I think this is Kirby Smart only further doubling down on Georgia's culture, which I think you and I will both sit here and readily admit is the biggest reason they're the best team in college football right now. Their culture is different from Alabama. It's different from Ohio State, and that's why they've been able to win the last 2 national championships.
No, I think that's right. I think it's absolutely right. Here's another sort of devil's advocate question. Why not consider Buster Faulkner, a guy that had been here, had been offensive coordinator at Southern Miss, allowed to leave to go to Georgia Tech, and seemingly not a real strong consideration here for this. Should Georgia have looked more closely at Faulkner?
What has Buster, and again, I think Buster Faulkner is going to be a very good coach, was a huge asset to this Georgia program. But what has Buster Faulkner shown you as an offensive coordinator and a play caller that would indicate that he is better equipped to do it at Georgia than Mike Bobo? You can point to his Southern Miss offenses. I guess he was an offensive coordinator at Middle Tennessee State as well. I just think Mike Bobo understands the pressure that comes with this job and knows what he's walking into. Mm-hmm. And because of that, again, I think Buster's going to be a very good offensive coordinator. But the fact that he chose to leave when he did, I think sort of indicated that this may have been in the works for quite some time, and that Bobo was always going to be the perceived number one guy to get this job.
Yeah, I think Buster just needs more experience. I think he's probably a pretty sharp guy, and he seemed to be a pretty good impact on some of Georgia's recruiting efforts, and I think that Stetson Bennett really liked him, but he's also a very young guy and has just not had enough experience as of yet, and I hope at Georgia Tech he gets that, and maybe it could be on Georgia's radar in the future. And then maybe the biggest sort of like devil's advocate style question of all, hey, this is the Georgia offensive coordinator job. Why not go out and just get the biggest name available and say, hey, come here and run the Georgia offense? Why not just do that?
I think if you've looked around and paid attention, Georgia's not the first marquee program to hire a new offensive coordinator this cycle. Alabama had to go get Tommy Rees, which I think you and I would both agree is not necessarily a big name, and was met with certainly plenty of skepticism when that hire was made. Do you know who Miami just hired as their offensive coordinator? This is just coming out since you've been on the air, so you probably don't.
I don't know.
They're hiring Shannon Dawson to be their offensive coordinator there, who was not very well liked in previous stops as an offensive coordinator. Notre Dame can't find the money somehow to buy out Andy Ludwig, the Utah offensive coordinator. There right now is not a strong market for offensive coordinators and offensive play callers in college football. And so this idea that there's some magical big name out there, that's not based on what we've seen in the hiring cycle for this year. And sure, there are maybe other guys you could throw out there. Brian Johnson, the Eagles quarterback coach, is a name that maybe I thought should have gotten some consideration. But it's worth mentioning as well, he's probably going to be the Eagles offensive coordinator next year. And with NIL, with all the changes to college football coming in recent years, college offensive coordinator jobs or college coordinator jobs in general are just far less attractive than they used to be. And I actually think with some of the success that we've seen with position coaches, Sam Pittman going off at Ogeron, though obviously that didn't work out in the long run. I think you've seen that, Charles Huff, an example, who's now at Marshall, who's done a really good job there, who was the Alabama running backs coach before. You don't necessarily need to be an offensive coordinator to get that next big head coaching job. And because of that, I think these offensive coordinator jobs at a pressure cooker place like a Georgia, like an Alabama, just make it harder than ever to really have and find success in that job. And it's, I think, far less attractive than I think most common fans would think to do so. Bill O'Brien had a top 6 offense last year in just about every metric, and Alabama fans were thrilled that he left to become the New England Patriots offensive coordinator. I think that just speaks to where the difficulty of being an offensive coordinator at this point in time lies.
Yeah, the street logic is that O'Brien got fired. And even though he left to go be Patriots offensive coordinator, the general thought is he got fired because he wasn't good enough. It gives you an idea of the pressure that exists here. And I want to kind of dive into this a little bit more, and we can start wrapping up after this, but your point about, who is really out there, this is something I can't kind of keep coming back to over and over again. I want to give you a couple other names that you kind of didn't mention. One of the guys that apparently Alabama had some interest in, who had no interest in Alabama, was Joe Moorhead, the Akron coach. He's not going to stay at Akron. But, Connor, Joe Moorhead, I would say, was a failure in his last offensive coordinator stint at Oregon. That offense didn't get any better with Moorhead at the helm. And if Moorhead's like this big name that you're kind of going after here, I don't think Moorhead is an upgrade over what I believe that Mike Bobo brings to the table, and that's one of the big names that was out there, the Akron head coach. I'd say the same thing a little bit about a guy like, say, Jeff Lebby at Oklahoma. That was the guy that, hey, if you went out and stole an offensive coordinator candidate, Lebby was the one you could steal. But, Connor, I don't want Georgia to play that fast. I don't want the Josh Heupel offense here. I think the Heupel offense is working okay for Tennessee, but I don't want wide receivers on the other side of the numbers. I don't want to necessarily play that fast. That's a candidate of a guy you could have brought in that I'm just not quite so sure is a great fit for Georgia. You have to think about that. And then finally, I'll give you this, is that, go steal somebody from the NFL. Well, that's what Kentucky thought they were doing a year ago with Rich Scangarello, who I believe was quarterbacks coach at San Francisco as a replacement for Liam Cohen. Scangarello was a total failure here just because you have kind of the sexy title in the NFL working for what I think of as kind of a sharp coach in Kyle Shanahan. It doesn't mean it translates to the college level. In the case of Scangarello, it didn't for Kentucky. Even by their standards, he was a failure. So those are some of the names that I sort of think of when you point out the fact that if you were looking for the big name replacement for Todd Monken, I'm just not sure who the big name would have even been.
And by the way, we just get it official here. Kirby Smart officially names Mike Bobo as the new offensive coordinator. Got a full quote here. I'm excited to name Mike Bobo our next offensive coordinator. Mike has a decade of experience as a successful SEC play caller and over 20 years spent at UGA, both as a player and a coach. Mike was an excellent addition to our staff last year as an analyst, and we look forward to his expanded leadership on the offensive side of the ball going forward. So Georgia makes it official, hires Mike Bobo. Again, I think you're right there in that again, this idea that there's a Todd Monken type figure out there, that's just not reality at this point in time. Look, I know, Todd Monken is the best offensive coordinator, I think, to ever come through Georgia. Mike Bobo was really, really good there at the end for Georgia. And yeah, after he left, things didn't necessarily work out, but I'll also point this out going forward. Look, coaching continuity, I think, has somewhat eaten into why Nick Saban has not been able to sustain the same level of success. Kirby Smart has won as many national championships as Nick Saban has since Smart left. And look, Glenn Schumann, I think, is going to be a future head coach, maybe as early as next season if the right job comes open. After that, you're looking at the possibility of Will Muschamp and Mike Bobo as your coordinators for the long haul. I think coaching stability is really important. And as the college football world continues to change and keep moving and going forward, I do think that having a guy like Bobo who's been around this program, who Smart is going to keep, so long as he continues to perform, and the same can be said with Will Muschamp here, I think that's a huge feather in Georgia's cap. And it's I think, a further indictment of the culture that they're trying to build and identify here and make it very clear, like, this is what we want Georgia to be on a year in, year out basis. And I think Mike Bobo only further cements that.
Well, I'll also add this too, which is, and I've said this to our audience a couple of times, is that you don't ever have to worry about Kirby Smart coaching another college team. You can debate if he'd ever coach in the NFL. But the thing I think you do have to worry about a little bit if you're a Georgia fan is, how much longer does Kirby want to do this in general? He's not getting close to retirement now. He's only been on the job for a few years. But if you want to keep him here for like a Vince Dooley type tenure, if you want 20 years of Kirby Smart, you better find some easy years in that time, because Kirby Smart is just one of those guys that's sort of famous for burning the candle at both ends. That may be what a Muschamp Bobo era looks like for him. It's a little bit of an easier year. I'm happy. I'm working with close friends. I'm not only winning, but I'm winning with people that I genuinely like spending time with. And that may be one of those things to kind of keep the odometer a little lower on Kirby and allow him to kind of have the energy necessary to do this for 2 decades, which some people sometimes, I think, wonder if he really would want to do that for that long, knowing how hard he works. Getting a chance to work with close friends is a way to make a tough job a little easier, which maybe makes him want to do the job a little longer.
I'm actually going the other way on this. I think Kirby Smart is going to coach at Georgia until he physically can't do it anymore. Okay. He does not strike me as a guy who wants to go do something else. And in fact, I think you look around at some of the guys that have gone into TV, Mac Brown in recent years, Urban Meyer, they keep wanting to come back into coaching. I just think when you're that successful, when you've won a championship, you're going to keep wanting to do this. And so I think your point there about bringing in Bobo, about bringing in Will Muschamp, about keeping Del McGee around for another year, about, just the continuity on this staff, I think that's going to make this, as you point out, a more pleasurable place to be. And really, I think long-term show what Georgia wants to be and what it envisioned. Kirby ends up being the right guy, the guy that was able to do the thing that Mark Richt very nearly could but could not do. And I think it's just further betting down on the idea that this is the way Georgia goes about doing things. It's the atmosphere, the culture that we want to have here. And I think the hiring of Mike Bobo further cements that. Look, we've written so much about culture, about toughness these past 2 seasons and the role that played in Georgia getting to where it got to. I think that plays the biggest reason why Georgia goes out and hires Mike Bobo today. He fits that culture. He knows what it's about. He's going to make some tweaks and some changes to the way that he does things like anyone would. But he's not coming in here to overhaul things the same way that Todd Monken was when he came in 2020. And I think that's the most important thing here. Georgia's at the point right now where they didn't need to go out and hire the next Todd Monken. They needed to go out and hire a guy that's going to keep doing and building on the things that have already made Georgia successful, and that's what Mike Bobo does.
All right, very, very quick. We'll let you go after this. I mentioned Kentucky a minute ago. They bring back Liam Cohen as offensive coordinator for 2023. Would you rather have Bobo or Cohen?
Give me Bobo. Yes, Cohen had some success last year, but the Rams were a mess this year, and we'll see what that team looks like.
High profile hire TCU steals away Kendall Briles. Rather have Briles or Bobo?
Bobo, because I don't believe that the system that Briles runs would be successful enough on a year-in, year-out basis at Georgia.
Clemson hires Garrett Riley this offseason. You rather have Riley or Bobo?
I would rather have Bobo, but that's more because of Kirby Smart than Dabo Swinney than necessarily anything about Garrett Riley there.
Who am I leaving out?
Tommy Rees?
Yeah, nobody wants Rees over Bobo. At least I would certainly hope so.
Yeah. The Washington offensive coordinator that was rumored for there, I'd still rather have Mike Bobo because I believe Kalen DeBoer deserves a lot of credit for what is going on at Washington there right now. I certainly would take Mike Bobo over Shannon Dawson, who Miami just had to hire there. So, this idea that there's this great big coordinator out there, I'd be interested in seeing what a Brian Johnson-led offense would look like. Yeah. You might yelp when you hear this. Dan Mullen would be interesting, but Dan Mullen would not fit in the slight. So just not culture at all here at Georgia. That would never work. And so this idea that there's this great offensive mind out there, there's no Todd Monken right now. What we know of Todd Monken, the play caller that he ended up becoming, that guy does not exist for hire right now. That's why he's going to be the offensive coordinator and, most importantly, play caller for the Baltimore Ravens next year.
Well, we also have this. I'm sorry. Go finish your point. No, you finish your point.
And so because that guy doesn't exist, you kind of have to go out there and invent the next Bobo or the next Monken, And I think Bobo can certainly do that for Georgia.
Well, you also have this thing, speaking of inventing type stuff, where it's there used to be the John Gruden, Urban Meyer candidate where they would outwardly pretend they didn't want to coach, but deep down you knew they really did. And Connor, I think we're conditioned now to think that everybody's that way, and they're not. So let's say that Georgia fans were I don't care about Mullen's past. I don't care what a goofball he is. I don't care about anything. I just want a really good offensive coordinator here at Georgia. Obviously, I think that Mullen is a good offensive coordinator. I think he's a bad head coach, but he's a good offensive coordinator. Connor, he doesn't want to do it. He's I think made it very, very clear. He doesn't want to be a head coach again. He doesn't want to do it. And in the case of Joe Brady, who obviously I thought was a transformational figure for LSU in 2019, the sense that we get is he doesn't want any part of college football. That this is not the days in which Urban Meyer was pretending not to want to coach or John Gruden was sort of pretending not to want to coach. There's actually a crop of guys out there right now, at least when it comes to college football, they don't want to do it. And they're being honest that because of the pressure, because of the challenges maybe brought about by transfer portal and things like that it's better to live on the lake and play with your family than it is to coach in college football. And they mean it. They're sticking to their guns on this.
Do I get to claim victory on our longstanding Joe Brady was more important to 2019 LSU than Joe Brady was?
Yeah, I will certainly argue that the Brady performance post 2019 has not lended a whole lot of credibility to what he did there. I still think he was good in 2019. I don't have much of an explanation for what's happened in the years since then.
Right, but in your larger point you're making there, again, this is a really hard job. Not everyone wanted it. I think it speaks a lot about Mike Bobo. Look, he is extremely aware of the conversation surrounding him and surrounding, the idea of him as coordinator. Run the damn ball, so to speak there. He's hyper aware of that. And the fact that he wants this job, that he was willing to step in and be the Georgia offensive coordinator again, in a time and era where you're seeing less and less coaches willing to make that grind and be a part of that, I can tell you this, Mike Bobo is going to be a lot better recruiter than Todd Monken was. And again, Todd Monken, great play caller. You didn't necessarily need him to be a recruiter out there, but we talked literally earlier today about going out there and recruiting and the value of that and what it means and what comes next for Georgia. Look, Georgia's going to be able to have a conversation with guys now like Dylan Raiola that are going to be able to better relate to a coach. And we hear so often, and Jeff's going to have a story on this later today about the impact of coaching turnover and what that means for recruits. With Bobo here for the long haul, I believe, I think that's only going to further help this in this idea that, hey, you're not at a place like Georgia. You're going there to get coached by Kirby Smart. You're going there to get coached by Mike Bobo, and you're going there to get coached by Will Muschamp. And that's going to be consistent throughout your entire college career. That's something that not a lot of schools can just frankly offer. And so if the Bobo hire works out and he is successful, and he does need to be successful, I'll admit that right here, the bold take that it is, you need to be a good offensive coordinator to keep a job like Georgia. I think if that's the case, that gives Georgia another feather in its cap to add.
I think that's right. I've got a heart out here, so I'm going to give you 60 seconds. There's a guy named Hugh in the comment section who basically says that offensive recruits aren't going to come to Georgia now because it's Bobo and not Monken. Let me ask you a serious question. What recruit has Georgia won because of Todd Monken over the course of the last 3 years?
I don't believe that recruit currently exists.
And how many recruits over the course of time would you say that Mike Bobo, on both sides of the ball, by the way, has contributed for Georgia over the course of his tenure here?
I know Mike. I know Malcolm Mitchell is one, and maybe one day we'll get to ask Kirby Smart about that, because Kirby Smart thought he was getting Malcolm Mitchell, and he was pretty upset that he did not, in fact, end up getting Malcolm Mitchell to come to Alabama. And Malcolm Mitchell was a really, really good player in his time at Georgia.
Yeah, so there you go. That's all you need to know on that. So we're out of time for right now. Connor, this is outstanding stuff. I appreciate you hopping on here and kind of providing this little bit of extra stuff. We may even throw this up on the podcast feed for tomorrow because of my personal situation I was dealing with. So that's good stuff. Connor, we'll talk to you soon. We'll obviously read everything you got there at DawgNation.com. Appreciate you being here.
Yep, thanks as always.
All right, y'all, we're super, super late. I have got to go. It's 10 till noon. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They got you covered on all of that. I got to go for now, but obviously we got plenty more to talk about this on the days to come. So tomorrow's my grandmother's funeral. I'm so sorry about that. We'll obviously be around for all the news that comes out, but if you're just joining us, Todd Monken heading to the Baltimore Ravens. Mike Bobo is the replacement. Georgia fans got opinions, and we'll keep talking about him in the days to come. Thanks for being here as a part of our RS Andrews Cool and a DawgNation Daily presented by ESOG Today.